Hello, hello, and welcome to the Daily Faded, where we get faded daily and talk about the day's politics and news. So happy to have you join me. Excuse me. Wow, I just cleaned my pipe. That makes such a huge difference. Woo! Moved on to an indica strain called Gushers that I've never heard of before, but I thought that sounded good. So I had to get my bowl cleaned out because I wanted to clean the pipe and pack a fresh, fully ground bowl, like, high quality like. But that meant I had to smoke what was left in the bowl because I couldn't just tap it out and let bud go unsmoked. Just seeing some news about protests on 5th Street in Los Angeles coming across my watch. Anyway, to make a long story short, I had to smoke it. And yeah, so I guess they call that pregaming. Anyway, thank you for being here tonight on February 28th, on May 28th, 2020, and welcome to the Daily Faded. If you're watching right now, there is a 2 out of 3 chance that I have spent months on your living room floor, and for that I am eternally grateful. Trump versus Twitter today. I guess that was the big story. There's plenty of other things that are of significance, but that was the one getting all the coverage. I forgot to get coronavirus case numbers today, so I'm going to disappear for 1 second. $102,917. So the big number, the American deaths, is 102,917. 102,917 Americans have died from COVID-19. Reuters reports that 20 states currently have rising case numbers of COVID, while a British study suggested that 24 states have not yet plateaued and are still on an upward trajectory with the virus. I have to say, I think I've mentioned this before, but there is one subject on which Joe Biden seems extremely genuine, and I think it's been a massive political asset in his career, and that is when he talks about loss and grieving, having lost his wife and child when he was very young, right when he first became elected senator, and then having lost his son a few years ago, 2015, 2016. He's been through the grief. He's experienced the grief. And he sort of eulogized the 100,000 dead in the United States. And he, this was on MSNBC, and he was good. He was genuine. He was heartfelt. I think he cares about the fact that people are hurting in this country. I do think he cares about that. Now, I think, you have to then follow through by being a real visionary leader and healing the people. That's what you need to do. I keep hearing all of these Democratic apparatchiks talking about Joe Biden as the next FDR. I mean, I'd love to see that happen. I don't imagine it's very likely. But, he said the things, above and beyond the bare minimum. Like, he said the kinds of things that every president has been able to show empathy at some point, just as every president has been cruel and barbaric at some point. But I got a lot of stories from the New York Times today. I started reading the New York Times and I started making notes, and before I knew it, I had multiple stories from the New York Times, like many. Anyway, so here we go into Trump versus Twitter. President Trump on Thursday signed an executive order to curtail the legal protections that shield social media companies from liability for the content posted on their platforms. This is from the New York Times. The move came just hours after Twitter added new fact-checking labels to hundreds of tweets, Kate Conger and Mike Isaac reported, escalating the social media network's confrontation with Mr. Trump. Twitter on Tuesday had appended fact-checking labels for the first time to two of Mr. Trump's tweets about mail-in ballots, rebutting their accuracy. In response, Mr. Trump accused his favorite social media network of stifling speech and declared that he would put a stop to the interference. White House officials drafted an executive order that would make it easier for federal regulators to argue that companies like Facebook, Google, and Twitter are suppressing free speech when they move to suspend users or delete posts. They've had unchecked power to censure, restrict, edit, shape, hide, alter virtually any form of communication between private citizens or large public audiences, Mr. Trump said as he signed the order on Thursday. Well, there's a lot of censorship on social media. There are a lot of Facebook groups that have been pulled down. Pro-BDS Facebook groups, Palestinian rights of any kind. You form a Palestinian rights group of any kind on Facebook, it gets taken down. Twitter famously got rid of Alex Jones. Sorry for that long pause. Twitter got rid of Alex Jones. These are acts of corporate censorship, and now I want to walk a fine line here because there is a spirit to what Trump is arguing that I agree with. And that spirit is that I think the First Amendment, I think we should have a law that declares the social media companies public-private utilities and extends the guarantee of First Amendment rights on the platforms. Personally, that's what I'm of the opinion. Now, free speech has consequences, and if the consequence of your free speech is that the owner of the platform on which you said it feels like they have to fact check you, so be it. That's their free speech too. So I would like to see more regulation of social media companies. I'd like to see them broken up, and I'd like to see the First Amendment apply evenly across social media companies. And I think the public deserves to know more about things like the algorithms that suggests your videos to watch on YouTube, for example. I watch a lot of lefty YouTube, and I'm always being recommended MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. They steer people towards so-called reliable sources. On the other hand, in a match between Jack Dorsey and Donald Trump, I'd rather see Jack Dorsey win because I don't hate him as much as I hate Donald Trump. I don't hate Donald Trump. I don't dislike him as much as I totally detest Donald Trump. And he was kind of cool in his Joe Rogan interview. One last thing on the social media story, Zuckerberg gave a quote to Fox News. I just believe strongly that Facebook shouldn't be the arbiter of truth of everything that people say online. Private companies probably shouldn't be, especially these platform companies, shouldn't be in the position of doing that. That's why we need a strong, independent media. That's why outlets like this exist, to speak truth to power. And I may only be speaking truth to power for 3 people right now, but you just wait, baby. You just wait. So we have more to talk about with the George Floyd case. There were more protests in South Minneapolis last night over the murder of George Floyd. Tear gas and rubber bullets again. This time it was accompanied by burning buildings and smashing things. Saw a video of them bashing in a police substation. New York Times says Mayor Jacob Frey of Minneapolis said in a news conference that the violent protests of the past 2 days are a reflection of the Black community's anger over 400 years of inequality. Also from the New York Times, the governor declared a state of emergency and activated the National Guard today after arson, rioting, and looting. Protests continue to spread across the country on Thursday night, including in New York, Denver, Albuquerque, and Portland, Oregon, one day after rallies in Los Angeles and Memphis. In St. Paul, the Minnesota capital, police officers in riot gear skirmished with protesters and several businesses were vandalized, according to photographs posted on Twitter and local media. Smoke could be seen billowing from a Napa Auto Parts store, and the windows of a Goodwill store were broken. The situation here in St. Paul remains dynamic, a police spokesperson said in an email. Now, there's a knee-jerk reaction, I think, a knee-jerk reaction about violence, against violence erupting up at protests. That suddenly the protesters are the bad ones because they went from being non-violent to being violent protesters. I have not heard of anyone being hurt yet by what's happened in Minneapolis, and I hope that no one is hurt. But Jacob Frey, the mayor's comment, points us to another interpretation of events. And I came to feel this way after the so-called Los Angeles riots. I prefer to call it the Los Angeles Uprising in 1992, which I happened to be right in the middle of as a white kid going to USC. American capitalism is obviously racist. Everything about our economy rests on the labor of Black people who were either enslaved or later subjugated in any number of ways. American capitalism leaves a lot of people, especially people of color, out, struggling. When those struggles boil over, violence is possible, especially damaging property. What was I don't remember who said it. Was it Martin Luther King Jr. who said, or no, or is it Robert Kennedy who said those who make nonviolent protest impossible make violent protest inevitable? Something like that. By and large, the property that is destroyed in these situations, I think, is, it's nothing personal. They're not going after an AutoZone because they have a beef with AutoZone. So AutoZone is just an unfortunate victim in the situation. But when they vandalize businesses, and they're damaging property, to me, that's representative of capitalism, right? It's those who are oppressed by capitalism fighting out against it. On top of that, the police constantly escalate these things in ways that they don't need to. When they come out in riot gear with tear gas and batons and guns and stun guns and all this shit, and you're just a protester there with a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, that's intimidating. And when people get intimidated, they get their back up. Now, look, I'm not justifying violence, and I'm not justifying damaging property. I think that protesters should avoid doing either. But what I am saying is that I think if you look at what the destruction of property represents, you get more insight into it and more understanding of it. And I think that's only a good thing. You know, we don't have to we can keep in mind that people are destroying a system that's holding them back, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's a political statement, whether it's intended to be a political statement or not. Charles M. Blow of the New York Times tweeted today, "It is estimated that the Boston Tea Party, the riot that gave birth to this country, resulted in $1.7 million in today's dollars in property damage. Tea. I'm just going to leave this right here for whoever needs to read it." You know, and I think damn right. You know, damn right. I don't support any individual act of property destruction, just like I believe in absolute nonviolence. But there are reasons these things happen, and they are symbols of a system that needs to be addressed. So once again, I've got something for you from, guess what? The New York Times. Look, I'm not even the biggest fan of the New York Times, but it's the first thing I read in the morning. And, you know, I went around and read other stuff, and these New York Times stories were decent stories. So, but this one is an unusual one because it's by Bhaskar Sankara, who is the editor at the Jacobin magazine, which is a socialist magazine, and has written a book. I think it's called The Socialist Manifesto. It's on my reading list. But Bhaskar Sankara editorial, you've probably heard socialists won't vote for Biden. We may not like him, but we don't want Trump to win. So he goes through a lot of what we know about the battle between anti-Biden leftists and everyone else in Democratic politics. But it's really all bullshit, especially calling out the DSA, which is not advocating against Biden and only has 60,000 members, distributed as they are among the 50 states. And given that 88% of Bernie supporters voted Democrat in 2016, it's kind of absurd to blame the DSA or socialists for a potential Biden loss. Sankara writes about being a socialist as walking a tightrope of criticizing both parties while trying to build a constituency in one of them. He continues, quote, "Such noise distracts attention from the real work that Democratic Socialists of America chapters across the country are doing this election cycle. Contrary to stereotypes, we are not pushing a third candidate or eager to see Mr. Trump's reelection. Instead, we are campaigning for core demands like Medicare for all, saving the U.S. Postal Service from bipartisan destruction, organizing essential workers to fight for better pay and conditions throughout the coronavirus crisis, and backing down-ballot candidates mostly running on the Democratic ballot line. This is the type of activity that, if successful, will bolster voter turnout and remind millions that politics can improve their lives. Far from unhinged sectarianism, this is a pragmatic strategy. The United States has a political system rigged against third parties, so groups like the DSA aren't trying to build an independent ballot line in vain. This is the type of activity that, if successful, will bolster. At the same time, we recognize just how unpopular both parties are. Rather than play spoiler on the one hand or let mass anger at the political establishment be monopolized by the populist right on the other, socialists are patiently building a base for pro-worker reforms this country badly needs. That's what walking a tightrope and making sure it actually goes somewhere means today. So I just brought this up to point out what you may or may not know. Wow, it's getting dark out. Damn it. That's not right. Sorry about that. I hope no one's getting seasick. The DSA does so much work in its local chapters, And that kind of grassroots energy, working with communities, working across lines with lots of other activist organizations, that builds the grassroots, that builds the democratic voting base. So when people are slamming democratic socialists as the bad guys in the Democratic Party, I just think it's completely bass backwards, and it's the other way around. So, like I said, it's all New York Times tonight. Oh, it's a little bit better when I lean in. It auto corrects. Hold on one second. I almost snarfed. I don't know why. Thank you for being so patient with me while I get stoned while I do this. New York Times. So we've been talking a lot about eviction moratoria, and rent and mortgage relief, and how desperately it's needed around the country. Here's an article: an avalanche of evictions could be bearing down on America's renters. The economic downturn is shaping up to be particularly devastating for renters, who are more likely to be lower income and work hourly jobs cut during the pandemic. This article is by Sarah Mervosh. Euclid, Ohio. The United States, already wrestling with an economic collapse not seen in a generation, is facing a wave of evictions as government relief payments and legal protections run out for millions of out-of-work Americans who have little financial cushion and few choices when looking for new housing. The hardest hit are tenants who had low incomes and little savings even before the pandemic, and whose housing costs ate up more of their paychecks. They were also more likely to work in industries where job losses have been particularly severe. Temporary government assistance has helped, as have government orders that put evictions on hold in many cities. But evictions will soon be allowed in about half of the states, according to Emily A. Benfer, a housing expert and associate professor at Columbia Law School, who is tracking eviction policies. Quote, I think we will enter into a severe renter crisis, and very quickly, Professor Benfer said. Without a new round of government intervention, she added, we will have an avalanche of evictions across the country. So obviously, this is extremely bad news. And this is why even when the evictions moratorium took place in LA, and Gavin Newsom put some in place, they were like 3 months, I think. And they really need to be 12 months, especially if you need people to be paying back those three, if you need people to be paying back the rent. Yeah, it's just millions of people are going to lose their homes. Millions of people are going to lose their homes. This thing just keeps getting worse, and the economic devastation is only going to get worse. More and more families may soon experience the dreaded eviction notice on the front door, the stomach-turning knock-knock from sheriff's deputies, the possessions piled up on the sidewalk. They will face displacement at a time when people are still being urged to stay at home to keep themselves and their communities safe, with the death toll from the virus now having passed 100,000 in the United States. That fear of eviction has been eating away at Sandy Naffa ever since she lost her income as the virus led to economic shutdowns. Ms. Naffa, who has been juggling 2 part-time jobs, teaching elementary school students how to read and working as a beauty consultant at a mall, quickly fell behind on the $800 she pays in rent each month for a 1-bedroom apartment in Euclid, Ohio, a suburb of Cleveland. She is now staring down a precarious future, desperately hoping that a one-off federal stimulus check and unemployment benefits, both of which she said she has yet to receive, will keep her afloat and stave off eviction. I mean, this really personalizes it, you know. How many Sandy Naffas are there out there? There are so many. Look, I'm privileged that my living situation is perfectly stable and fine, and I don't think that I have anything to worry about. But I'm deeply, deeply concerned about all of the people who are facing eviction and foreclosure. And this kind of goes hand in hand with another article from the New York Times. I swear this is the last one. This one by Ben Kesselman. For millions of Americans left out of work by the coronavirus pandemic, government assistance has been a lifeline preventing a plunge into poverty, hunger, and financial ruin. This summer, that lifeline could snap. The $1,200 checks sent to most households are long gone, at least for those who needed them most, with little imminent prospect for a second round. The lending program that helped millions of small businesses keep workers on the payroll will wind down if Congress does not extend it. Eviction moratoriums that are keeping people in their homes are expiring in many cities. And the $600 per week in extra unemployment benefits that have allowed tens of millions of laid off workers to pay rent and buy groceries will expire at the end of July. The latest sign of the economic strain and the government's role in easing it came Thursday when the Labor Department reported that millions more Americans applied for unemployment benefits last week. More than 40 million have filed for benefits since the crisis began, and some 30 million are receiving them. So there you have it, folks. This is what I've been talking about, why we've been trying to talk about real solutions for months now on this live stream, podcast, YouTube show, whatever you call this thing, is we know how to solve these problems. We know that if you put money into the hands of people, it gets spent in the real economy and it lifts the economy. We know that. And we know that when you take money from the poor and you give it to the rich and you believe in some false church of trickle-down economics, we know that that doesn't work. We've tried it over and over and over again, and it has failed. It is time to redistribute wealth to the average American. With that, I bid you a fond adieu. Peace out. Please subscribe and hit the like button, and I will be back on Monday night at 8 o'clock Pacific.